Freehand piercings, pros, cons, advantages, disadvantages. Going to give you 5 of each. Coming up next on Pros and Cons by a Piercer, episode number 71. So stick around. For those who are new to the channel, my name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and operate the fabulous Axiom body piercing studio located in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. So, when I talk to you about these things, I'm talking to you with a level of expertise as someone who has been in the industry for well over 26 years. Now, this topic may be a little bit more inside baseball than most topics, but at the same time, it's one that does come up on a regular basis. People will specifically ask me if I do this piercing or that piercing, freehand or with forceps. They'll also ask me which is best, in my opinion. Freehand means that you're not using forceps or clamping the area. Basically, instead of doing that, you're using your own fingers to manipulate the area or hold it in place, or you're using some type of method with a needle receiving tube or a cork. There are a number of piercings that I would suggest doing freehand. A number of ear piercings, some genital piercings just work better. Septums, they work better as a freehand piercing without forceps. Other piercings, I don't understand why people do them without. But we're going to get into what the logic is behind it and etc. I'm going to give you 5 pros, 5 cons, and talk about that as much as I can today. Let's start with the pros, the advantages, the things that, are a thumbs up. Number 1, you are keeping the piercing area in its natural state while doing the piercing. This can be important, especially in areas of the body where if you clamp it or apply pressure to the area or pinch the area, it changes its shape because it can make the piercing go one way or another. This is especially true with a number of ear piercings, including lobe piercings. If you clamp them, they're not going to be exactly the same, and it increases your likelihood of creating errors where it's this way or that way. Most commonly, this is with septum piercings. If you flatten out that tissue, it changes shape. So you do the piercing and then you take the clamps off and suddenly the piercing is this way or that way or this way or that way. It's very important to have that in its natural state when you pierce it so that the jewelry hangs correctly. And let you know, septum piercings are by far, for most piercers, the most frustrating of all piercings to get straight. Number 2, with freehand piercings, you're less likely, it's one less thing to contaminate the area. Basically, when you use forceps, you're using an additional tool. There's a possibility of that being contaminated once you remove it from the sterilization pouch and it's laying on the tray, you touch it, something happens. So it's one more way contaminants could be technically transferred to the piercing. However, I've always been a little leery of this argument because you should be decontaminating your tools and sterilizing them one way or another. But that's kind of an advantage. Number 3, it creates less trauma to the piercing. A lot of this comes down to how tight you clamp it. I have seen piercings that people have done that the whole area around it bruised and got inflamed and etc. basically because they had the forceps on too tight. When you eliminate the forceps from the situation, there is no way of making that mistake and causing that additional trauma. Number 4, it's less work for the piercer because they don't have to decontaminate the tool, repackage it, and re-sterilize it. So it's less work. It's one less thing they have to do at the beginning of the day and one less thing they have to worry about. So basically, if they're lazy, it's much easier if you're not using forceps because it's less work. Number 5, with freehand piercings, and this is especially true with a lot of ear piercings, instead of clamping the tissue, often it's easier to get into those tight areas by doing it freehand with a needle receiving tube than it is to try to clamp the area, and then pierce through it. The clamps will kind of take up a little bit of that room when you put them on there, and it can affect, especially when you're doing really tight areas like the upper ear area, the rook, and in this forward helix area. It's such a tight area, and you put forceps in there, you have even less space to do the actual piercing. With that out of the way, let's move on to the cons, the disadvantages of freehand piercings. Number one, it increases the likelihood of a needle strike. Now, a needle strike is where a piercer does a piercing and then ends up sticking themselves, usually after the piercing is done. Because you're using your hands to manipulate the tissue in the area, it increases the likelihood of that happening. Especially on areas of the body like navels and nipples. It's just an increased risk because with forceps, you can clamp the area and isolate that your non-dominant hand away from the area and out of the way. Number two, doesn't support the tissue. With certain areas of the body where the tissue is very flexible or bendable, one of the things the forceps does is it kind of supports the tissue and keeps it in place. When you're doing it freehand, you're grabbing it with your fingers, it's just not as effective at doing that. Number three, tissue rolling. Tissue rolling is where you do the piercing and the tissue changes or shifts while you're doing the piercing. So it's really common with tracheus piercings. Do this one. Take your index fingers, stick it inside, just not all the way in your ear, but just on that edge of your tracheus. Now bend down, now pinch down with your thumb. Notice how the tissue's thicker on the outside and it kind of moves back and forth. When you put a needle through that, it will flap and move that way too. So it can cause the entrance to be different than the exit and create a whole number of problems with the angle being wrong. So tissue rolling is very important, or instead of piercing through the cartilage tissue, it goes through just that thin layer of fatty tissue that's on the top, like with helixes or when you do an industrial. That's tissue rolling. Number four, incorrect depth or angle. When you use forceps, you basically take those two dots, you line them up inside the triangle or circle, and then you clamp down and hold them in place. When you're doing freehand, you're kind of relying on that and then pinching down in some cases, or just forcing the needle through into a needle receiving tube. It increases the likelihood of the angle being off one way or another, or going too deep or too shallow. This is a really common mistake with piercings like, for example, nipple piercings and navel piercings, where especially noticeable on nipple piercings, where here's the nipple, and instead of it being pierced like this, right at the base, it's pierced like this. That's caused from doing freehand piercings, or if you're using if they were using forceps, not marking and clamping it correctly. Number five, because there's not that added support in some cases where they pinch it and then push the tissue or push the needle through, it can tear through the tissue instead of cutting through it. This will increase the amount of trauma, which will prolong the swelling even longer and cause other issues. In conclusion, there isn't a wrong way or a right way to do a piercing. As long as your piercer is being safe, practicing cross-contamination prevention, has the skill to get it in the correct way, it's not necessarily meaning that they're a terrible piercer because they do everything freehand. It just means that generally is either how they got taught to pierce or how they feel comfortable. However, especially with inexperienced piercers, you really should talk to them about whether or not they use forceps or not. Forceps are a tool that does greatly affect how straight the piercing is and how well it is placed in that particular piercing. For many of the reasons why I mentioned in this, as far as cons, that's one of the reasons. Especially if they're inexperienced, a forceps of kind of guiding the placement and the strike of the needle is important. So what I'm saying is, if your piercer says, I don't do that with clamps, talk to them about it. Ask them why. Ask them the philosophy behind it, and etc. Just like you would what jewelry they use or what have you. I believe the more educated you are about piercing in general, the more likely you are to know what questions to ask like this one and know what the correct answers are. one way or another. So I hope you found this interesting, or, learned something, or found it educational and useful. If you did, give me a thumbs up. Let me know that you liked it. I like it when you like it. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. Hit that notification bell so that you're notified every single time we post something on this channel. If you feel like I breezed over something, or I didn't answer the question correctly, or maybe it brought up a whole new question that you didn't know you even wanted to ask, or you have something to add, or maybe you're a piercer and you prefer freehand, please leave a comment. I usually answer them on a regular basis, and always happy to do so, and I will continue to do that until I can't anymore. If you like merch, you like t-shirts and so forth, check out our merch store, links in the description. Also, we do have a giveaway. You have to watch the studio update that came out on June 12th. If you do that here in the next couple days, you have a chance to win a t-shirt from our merch store. But check out the links in the description, also the merch bar, and show your love of body art and support the channel and artists that work on this channel and create and add content. Till next time, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see you for your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you for watching. As always, go out, enjoy the weather if it's nice in your area of the world. Be safe, keep your distance, and just generally do something good for yourself or other people. Take care, everybody. Have a good day.